At the dawn of the 20th century, a man was born who would later become one of the most dangerous lawbreakers in American history, John Dillinger. He grew up in a modest environment, among quiet streets and a simple life that gave no hint of the bloody future awaiting him. He was an ordinary young man, working odd jobs and trying to prove himself in a harsh economic society. Yet inside, he was filled with a silent rebellion and a constant sense that the world had never given him a fair chance. With his first real encounter with crime, he could not yet know that this small step would open a dark door, consuming him entirely and leading him down a path of no return. His introduction to crime was not professional, it was a result of recklessness and youthful impulsiveness seeking quick money. He got involved in a failed robbery and was arrested, spending years in prison. Behind the cold walls, a true transformation occurred. Prison was not a place for reform, it was a school for producing skilled criminals. He met hardened thieves and listened to daring heist stories, learning details he had never imagined, bank surveillance, reading police movements, choosing escape routes. Gradually, his mind reshaped itself, not as a simple worker, but as a strategist for major operations. He was released during the Great Depression, when banks were accused of strangling people and stealing their savings. In this tense atmosphere, Dillinger saw a perfect opportunity. He did not see himself as just a thief, he considered his actions a kind of social revenge. He began assembling former prison comrades, men who had lost faith in the system and were willing to risk everything. His first plan was not random, it was carefully calculated, relying on speed, precision, and psychological control. He fired his gun only when necessary and always aimed to complete the operation in minutes, leaving astonishment and silence behind him. His first major success came in Indiana, where he boldly raided a bank. He entered calmly, brandished his weapon with confidence, and announced in a firm voice that everyone must remain still. His commands were not hysterical but measured, and the employees quickly complied. Within 5 minutes, he was outside with a bag full of cash. No one was hurt, and no obvious evidence was left behind. From that moment, his name started to echo through police stations, and newspapers began to write about a thief who was different, organized, cool-headed, and daring. With repeated heists, he transformed from a local criminal into a nationwide phenomenon. He moved between states in stolen cars, constantly changing their plates, using aliases. He relied on a support network for safe houses and weapons. He never stayed in one place too long, as if living in a constant race against time. This rapid movement made him hard to catch and gave him a sense of superiority. With every successful operation, his confidence grew, and he began to see his pursuit as a mental game against law enforcement agencies. Soon, his story reached the national press. His confident smile became a fixture in headlines. Some citizens saw him as a hero challenging the banks that had ruined families, while others considered him a looming danger. This duality created a mysterious aura around him, a mixture of admiration and fear. For him, this contradiction was exhilarating. He wasn't only seeking money, he was chasing fame. He wanted his name remembered, to become a story people retell, even if the price was endless pursuit by the law. As his operations escalated, the Federal Bureau of Investigation (FBI) got involved, seeing his activities as a direct threat to state authority. Dillinger became the top of the most wanted list, and a nationwide manhunt was launched. For him, this was an unofficial acknowledgement of his danger. Being pursued by a federal agency meant he had surpassed ordinary criminals. Yet he showed no fear. The chase fueled his challenge, making him more careful in planning and bolder in execution. Despite his successes, his life was far from stable. He lived in constant tension, sleeping with one eye open and the other watching the door. He did not fully trust anyone, not even his closest partners. He knew money could buy loyalty, but it could also buy betrayal. Nevertheless, he continued expanding his operations, targeting bigger banks with heavier security. He monitored police movements meticulously and read newspapers to anticipate his enemies' thoughts. This awareness made him a complex adversary whose next move was almost impossible to predict. Each time he escaped, his legend grew. His name was whispered in bars and train stations. Some women admired his audacity, and some young men wished to live his risky life. Yet deep down, he knew this fame was fragile and that a small mistake could end everything. Still, he did not retreat. He seemed driven by an invisible force toward a predetermined destiny, indifferent to the consequences. Thus, in just a few years, an ordinary young man had become the country's most dangerous bank robber. He was not merely a criminal but a symbol of an era of economic and social chaos. With every new heist, he inched closer to the summit of fame, and ever closer to the abyss waiting silently below. His audacity peaked when he moved to Chicago, home to major banks and the riskiest opportunities. Amid the crowd and noise, he felt almost invisible. He planned more complex operations, using fast cars and modern weapons. The city offered perfect cover, but it was also teeming with eyes watching for any suspicious movement. During this time, the pursuit became personal under the powerful director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, who considered capturing Dillinger a matter of national pride. This was no longer just a criminal chase, it was a battle to assert the authority of the state. Special teams were created, intelligence gathered from across states, and cash rewards doubled for anyone providing leads. One of the most famous confrontations occurred at the Little Bohemia Lodge, where he was surrounded by federal agents at night. It seemed the end had come, but poor coordination led to chaos. In the darkness, amidst gunfire, Dillinger managed to escape once again. This getaway embarrassed authorities and reinforced his image as an untouchable man. But repeated escapes came at a cost. Some of his gang members were killed, others arrested, and critical information began to leak. The noose tightened, and psychological pressure mounted. He no longer trusted anyone and constantly changed his residences. He lived like a ghost, rootless and unstable. In the summer of 1934, the FBI received a decisive tip from a woman who agreed to cooperate in exchange for protection. She revealed his plan to attend a movie showing at the Biograph Theater. He had no idea that this ordinary outing would lead to the final chapter of his story. He left the theater at night, laughing and chatting as if the world were calm. But he noticed men standing strangely nearby. He tried to slip away down a side alley, but orders were given, "Stop." In an instant, gunfire erupted in the street. Bullets hit him, and he fell to the ground, ending years of heists and pursuits in a few fleeting seconds. People gathered around, some shocked, some unable to believe the legend had ended so abruptly. His death was not just the end of a criminal but the announcement of a new era for the FBI. His story became a security lesson and proof that the chase may be long, but it never lasts forever. Despite his violent end, his name remained in popular culture, seen by some as a dangerous criminal and by others as the product of a harsh era. He became a cinematic figure and a legend continuously retold. And so the mask fell from the man who challenged banks and the state for years. A story full of mystery, daring, and a dramatic ending that proves that a life of crime, however thrilling, always has a conclusion that cannot be escaped. By the summer of 1934, the FBI had received the tip they had been waiting for. For years, Dillinger had moved like a ghost, slipping between states and evading capture with uncanny skill. But the net had finally tightened. The informant, a woman familiar with his routine, revealed that he planned to attend a local movie showing at the Biograph Theater. To Dillinger, it seemed like a harmless night out, a brief respite from the endless chase. He had no inkling that this ordinary act would become the stage for the final chapter of his life. The streets outside the theater were alive with shadows. Dillinger moved casually, confident in his usual disguise and charm, never suspecting that agents had surrounded the perimeter. He exchanged casual words with acquaintances, laughed, and lit a cigarette, unaware that each step brought him closer to destiny. For years, he had been the hunter, always one step ahead. Tonight, however, the tables were turned. The very city that had been his playground had transformed into a trap, and the predators he had eluded for so long waited silently, poised to strike. As he stepped out of the theater into the night, he sensed something was off, an unusual stillness, a tension in the air. He noticed men standing too rigidly, their eyes fixed on him. Instinct urged him to flee, to dive into a nearby alley. But before he could react, shouts rang out, orders to halt. Dillinger's world exploded into chaos, gunfire cracked through the night. The precision and control he had mastered for years were useless against the sudden ambush. Every instinct screamed survival, yet he was trapped in the one situation where luck no longer favored him. Bullets tore through the night, and Dillinger was hit multiple times. He fell hard onto the pavement, the shock of the impact blending with the shock of inevitability. Years of daring, elusiveness, and cunning came to a sudden, violent halt. Spectators and passers-by froze, some in awe, some in disbelief. The man who had evaded authorities across state lines, the figure who had become a legend whispered about in every town, now lay lifeless before their eyes. In mere seconds, the myth met reality. The aftermath was both immediate and symbolic. Police quickly secured the area, confirming the identity of the fallen outlaw. News spread like wildfire across Chicago and beyond. John Dillinger, the most notorious bank robber in American history, was dead. The city's relief mingled with a strange fascination. Here was a criminal who had become larger than life, and now his life had been cut short, leaving only tales and headlines to preserve his memory. His death was a public spectacle, witnessed by a crowd whose emotions ranged from fear to admiration. For the FBI, Dillinger's death was a triumph. J. Edgar Hoover had achieved what many thought impossible, capturing, or rather ending, the career of a man who had humiliated the agency for years. The media celebrated this success, portraying the operation as a symbol of law and order prevailing over chaos. Dillinger's death became a turning point in American criminal history, a reminder of the growing power and reach of federal law enforcement, and a lesson for anyone who might be tempted to follow in his footsteps. Yet, for the public, the story did not end with his death. Films, newspapers, and later books immortalized his image, the charming, daring outlaw who had outwitted authorities time and time again. He became a symbol of rebellion, of a man who had lived on his own terms, challenging both banks and law enforcement. Some saw him as a cautionary tale, others as an anti-hero, a figure who reflected the anger and desperation of a nation struggling through economic collapse. His image endured, larger than the man himself. The legend of Dillinger also inspired a new understanding of crime and celebrity. People debated endlessly, was he a ruthless criminal, or merely the product of a brutal, unforgiving era? His life straddled the line between genius and madness, daring and recklessness. While he had terrorized banks and evaded justice, he had also captivated the imagination of a nation hungry for stories of courage, defiance, and audacity. In death, as in life, he remained a figure of fascination, a man whose choices and consequences could never be ignored. Dillinger's death also revealed the human cost of a life lived on the edge. Friends and accomplices had died or been imprisoned, many betrayed or hunted down. He had trusted few and relied heavily on his own wits, yet even that was not enough. The story of his final moments reminded the world that no matter how clever, how elusive, or how legendary, mortality and consequence are inescapable. The myth of invincibility met the unyielding reality of fate. Yet, for the public, the story did not end with his death. Films, newspapers, and later books immortalized his image, the charming, daring outlaw who had outwitted authorities time and time again. He became a symbol of rebellion, of a man who had lived on his own terms, challenging both banks and law enforcement. Some saw him as a cautionary tale, others as an anti-hero, a figure who reflected the anger and desperation of a nation struggling through economic collapse. His image endured, larger than the man himself. The legend of Dillinger also inspired a new understanding of crime and celebrity. People debated endlessly, was he a ruthless criminal, or merely the product of a brutal, unforgiving era? His life straddled the line between genius and madness, daring and recklessness. While he had terrorized banks and evaded justice, he had also captivated the imagination of a nation hungry for stories of courage, defiance, and audacity. In death, as in life, he remained a figure of fascination, a man whose choices and consequences could never be ignored. Dillinger's death also revealed the human cost of a life lived on the edge. Friends and accomplices had died or been imprisoned, many betrayed or hunted down. He had trusted few and relied heavily on his own wits, yet even that was not enough. The story of his final moments reminded the world that no matter how clever, how elusive, or how legendary, mortality and consequence are inescapable. The myth of invincibility met the unyielding reality of fate. And so, the curtain fell on John Dillinger, the man who had challenged banks, law enforcement, and fate itself. His life was a mixture of daring exploits, meticulous planning, and audacious escapes, a life defined by risk and legend. Though his end was violent and abrupt, It cemented his place in history as a figure both feared and admired. His story would echo through time, a tale of mystery, courage, and tragedy, reminding all that some legends, though mortal, never truly die, they only grow more powerful in memory. Cities where he had struck quickly became haunted territories. Banks tightened security, neighbors whispered warnings, and the FBI began coordinating across state lines. Dillinger moved like a shadow, slipping between urban grids, leaving only footprints of audacity and fear. Each heist now involved multiple escape routes, decoy vehicles, and backup plans. He learned the art of disappearing in broad daylight, turning public spaces into stages for misdirection. The thrill of the chase was intoxicating, but beneath the surface, he knew the law was slowly closing in. Every new job brought him closer to the inevitable confrontation he had long feared yet perhaps secretly desired. Despite the growing danger, Dillinger cultivated a public image. He appeared in newspapers with his trademark smile, seemingly confident, charming, and untouchable. Some admired him as a modern-day Robin Hood, others despised him as a deadly criminal. This duality fed his legend and emboldened him. But fame was a double-edged sword. The more people watched, the fewer places remained safe. Every public appearance became a gamble, every smile a mask hiding anxiety and calculation. Dillinger understood that notoriety was both armor and weapon, but also a tether drawing him closer to the trap set by relentless law enforcement. Alliances within the gang grew fragile. Betrayal lurked in every corner. Friends turned informants, frightened by bounties or pressure from law enforcement. Dillinger's intuition was the only thing that kept him alive. Each betrayal hardened him, turning caution into an obsession. The careful equilibrium he maintained was under constant threat, yet he thrived on the tension. It was this mix of danger, intelligence, and audacity that defined him. His genius was measured not only by the loot he stole but by the intricate web of deception, foresight, and manipulation that allowed him to survive when others inevitably fell. The press fueled his legend, often romanticizing his deeds. Headlines celebrated his charm and audacity, portraying him as a clever outlaw challenging an unjust system. This attention delighted him but also painted a target on his back. Now, every disguise, every false identity, every borrowed car was not just a shield, it was armor against an ever-watchful public and law enforcement alike. He began altering his appearance, changing hairstyles, trimming mustaches, and adopting new clothing styles to elude recognition. Yet, no matter how clever, the notoriety he craved inevitably drew eyes that never looked away. Dillinger's network became increasingly sophisticated. He employed drivers, lookouts, and informants, coordinating movements across multiple states. Communication relied on coded messages and signals, as one mistake could unravel everything. Even his closest allies feared him, aware that his ruthlessness could turn inward if betrayed. This tension was both a weakness and a strength. It kept the gang disciplined but also isolated Dillinger emotionally. He learned to trust only his own decisions, relying on instinct honed by years of narrow escapes. In the cat-and-mouse game with authorities, he was both predator and prey, navigating a world where every choice could be life or death. Yet for all the careful planning, luck remained a factor. Near misses with law enforcement became routine. Patrols passing a second too early, a tip-off from a nervous accomplice, or an unexpected civilian witness could disrupt months of preparation. Each time he escaped, it reinforced his sense of invincibility, but it also added to the burden. Every narrow escape became a memory he carried, a constant reminder that the law was relentless. These experiences sharpened him, yet slowly eroded any sense of normalcy. Dillinger was becoming a legend not only for his crimes but also for the tension that seemed permanently etched into his every step. Cities where he had struck quickly became haunted territories. Banks tightened security, neighbors whispered warnings, and the FBI began coordinating across state lines. Dillinger moved like a shadow, slipping between urban grids, leaving only footprints of audacity and fear. Each heist now involved multiple escape routes, decoy vehicles, and backup plans. He learned the art of disappearing in broad daylight, turning public spaces into stages for misdirection. The thrill of the chase was intoxicating, but beneath the surface, he knew the law was slowly closing in. Every new job brought him closer to the inevitable confrontation he had long feared yet perhaps secretly desired. Despite the growing danger, Dillinger cultivated a public image. He appeared in newspapers with his trademark smile, seemingly confident, charming, and untouchable. Some admired him as a modern-day Robin Hood, others despised him as a deadly criminal. This duality fed his legend and emboldened him. But fame was a double-edged sword. The more people watched, the fewer places remained safe. Every public appearance became a gamble, every smile a mask hiding anxiety and calculation. Dillinger understood that notoriety was both armor and weapon, but also a tether drawing him closer to the trap set by relentless law enforcement. Alliances within the gang grew fragile. Betrayal lurked in every corner. Friends turned informants, frightened by bounties or pressure from law enforcement. Dillinger's intuition was the only thing that kept him alive. Each betrayal hardened him, turning caution into an obsession. The careful equilibrium he maintained was under constant threat, yet he thrived on the tension. It was this mix of danger, intelligence, and audacity that defined him. His genius was measured not only by the loot he stole but by the intricate web of deception, foresight, and manipulation that allowed him to survive when others inevitably fell. By the end of this period, Dillinger's life had become a high-wire act between legend and reality. Every bank, every getaway, and every disguise was part of a dangerous rhythm. He was a man who had outwitted authorities for years, yet with each passing day, the inevitability of confrontation loomed closer. His story was no longer simply one of crime, it was a tale of survival, cunning, and the human fascination with the edge of danger. The shadows behind the legend were growing longer, and the world watched as this master thief navigated the perilous line between triumph and doom. By now, Dillinger was no longer just a name whispered in fear, he had become a symbol of audacity. Each heist was meticulously planned, a high-stakes performance where precision could mean the difference between life and death. Before entering a bank, he would spend days observing staff routines, studying patrol patterns, and memorizing every escape route. He understood that the law had adapted. It wasn't enough to act quickly, he had to anticipate every variable. This obsession with planning created near-perfect operations, but it also added pressure, as any oversight could instantly turn triumph into catastrophe. One of the most daring aspects of his criminal career was his ability to vanish without a trace. Cars were swapped multiple times during an escape, disguises changed mid-route, and decoys were strategically placed to confuse pursuers. He relied on a network of safe houses, each meticulously prepared to hide him, his weapons, and stolen cash. Yet even with such preparation, nothing was guaranteed. A minor misstep, a neighbor noticing a strange car, a tip from an anxious accomplice, could unravel everything. Every success strengthened his legend, but the constant tension gnawed at his nerves, reminding him that luck was fleeting. The FBI, led by J. Edgar Hoover, intensified their pursuit. Agents studied his every move, coordinated across state lines, and issued photographs to law enforcement agencies nationwide. Dillinger understood he was now the most wanted man in America. The stakes were higher than ever, but the thrill of the chase fueled him. He moved like a shadow through urban grids, entering one city in the night and disappearing by dawn. His ability to read environments, anticipate patrols, and mislead pursuers became legendary. Each escape was not just survival, it was a carefully choreographed defiance against a powerful institution. Public fascination with Dillinger grew as newspapers glamorized his escapades. Headlines highlighted his charm, wit, and daring, painting him as a modern Robin Hood figure to some, while others decried him as a deadly menace. This duality fascinated him. Dillinger enjoyed the notoriety, it was both protection and peril. Every smile in print, every story retold, made him a figure the public watched closely. The challenge became balancing fame with caution. One wrong move in a crowded street or public event could undo years of careful evasion, yet the lure of recognition was impossible to resist. Despite his confidence, cracks began to show within his inner circle. Some gang members grew restless, fearful of the relentless pressure from law enforcement. Others began to question their leader's judgment, concerned about the growing attention that put everyone in danger. Dillinger sensed the fragility of trust and adapted accordingly, keeping his most crucial plans to himself. He became increasingly secretive, moving alone when possible, and limiting exposure to allies. In this game, trust was a rare currency, and betrayal was a constant threat lurking just behind loyalty. The sheer audacity of his crimes drew the attention of rival criminals as well. Other gangs observed his techniques, envying his luck and daring. Some sought alliances, others plotted revenge. Dillinger had to navigate not only the eyes of law enforcement but also the hidden dangers of criminal envy. The network of alliances and betrayals grew complex. In many ways, the streets became a chessboard, each move calculated, each opponent analyzed. One misstep could be fatal. And yet, he thrived in this environment, blending cunning, charm, and calculated aggression into a deadly combination that kept him one step ahead. The tension reached a peak during one particularly daring heist in a heavily guarded bank in Indianapolis. Dillinger and his team orchestrated an elaborate plan involving multiple decoy vehicles, timing the operation to coincide with a busy lunch hour. Employees and customers were controlled swiftly and without unnecessary violence. In a matter of minutes, they were gone, leaving behind confusion, panic, and an awe-inspiring legend. That heist epitomized his skill, speed, precision, and psychology all intertwined. Yet even this flawless performance reminded him that every close call carried the weight of mortality. Each escape became more daring than the last. Dillinger pushed boundaries with improvised tactics, jumping fences, dodging bullets, and exploiting civilian distractions. He was a master of turning urban chaos into a shield, weaving through streets with uncanny agility. But the risk intensified with every success. Law enforcement was learning, adapting, and growing impatient. Every bold maneuver increased the likelihood of a fatal miscalculation. Dillinger's life had become a constant balancing act between brilliance and disaster, where survival depended on skill, nerve, and an almost supernatural sense of timing. Yet, for all the danger and pressure, Dillinger seemed to revel in the challenge. There was a thrill in knowing that he was both hunted and untouchable, that each heist was a high-stakes game against the very institutions designed to stop him. The tension sharpened his mind, honed his instincts, and made him unpredictable. Friends and foes alike began to acknowledge that he operated on a level beyond ordinary criminals, blending meticulous preparation with an uncanny ability to adapt in the moment. His reputation grew, and with it, the mythology surrounding his name. By the end of this period, Dillinger's story was no longer simply about theft, it was about survival, genius, and audacity. Every bank he struck, every narrow escape, and every moment of deception reinforced the legend of a man who had become untouchable. And yet, beneath the bravado and skill, he knew that each daring move drew the net closer. The shadows behind the legend were longer than ever, and the day of reckoning loomed. Dillinger's life was a dance on the edge of fate, thrilling, terrifying, and destined to leave an indelible mark on history. By this stage, the relentless pursuit of Dillinger had transformed his life into a tense, unending chess match. Every decision carried immense weight, every movement could be fatal. Law enforcement across multiple states had begun to coordinate like never before, sharing intelligence, distributing photographs, and monitoring every hint of suspicious activity. Dillinger knew he was now the most hunted man in America. Yet this extreme pressure also sharpened him, turning constant stress into a weapon. He became hyper-aware of every detail, the angle of a patrol car, the placement of a civilian, the faintest sound in an empty alley. Trust had become almost non-existent. Even his closest allies were viewed with suspicion, each meeting layered with caution. Betrayal had already claimed several associates, and Dillinger knew that the consequences of misplaced trust were deadly. This isolation forced him to rely increasingly on his instincts honed by years of narrow escapes and meticulous observation. Yet the loneliness was palpable, a shadow companion to the fame and notoriety that surrounded him. Every decision was a delicate calculation, advance too boldly, and death might follow, hesitate too long, an opportunity or survival would slip through his fingers. Dillinger's heists had evolved into a symphony of timing, strategy, and psychological control. Banks were no longer simply robbed, they were studied as environments to be manipulated. Employee routines, the positioning of guards, the layout of entrances and exits all became variables in his calculations. Even mundane details, like the pattern of passing pedestrians or the angle of sunlight on a window, could influence his decisions. Success relied on an almost obsessive attention to detail. Any misjudgment could mean immediate capture or death. Each heist was a delicate balance between precision and improvisation, a high-stakes test of intellect, nerve, and adaptability. Public fascination only intensified under these conditions. Newspapers glorified his audacity, describing him as a daring rogue who outsmarted authorities at every turn. Some hailed him as a hero against an unfair banking system, others painted him as a menace that must be stopped at all costs. Dillinger understood the power of perception. His reputation was both shield and weapon, allowing him to command attention while masking his movements. Yet fame was also a danger. Every story published made him more visible, more scrutinized, and more likely to slip up. The very thing that fueled his legend also heightened the stakes of every move. Within his gang, tensions simmered dangerously. Some members were loyal only because fear demanded it, while others plotted self-preservation above all else. Dillinger's genius lay not just in executing heists, but in controlling these human variables, keeping fear, loyalty, and uncertainty balanced like a tightrope act. His leadership was enforced through intellect, charisma, and occasional intimidation, but always calculated to maintain order without provoking rebellion. Every partner in crime was a tool, carefully placed, but never fully trusted. In this fragile ecosystem, one wrong decision could unravel months of preparation in an instant. The FBI's strategy became increasingly aggressive. Special units were deployed to anticipate Dillinger's next move, and agents infiltrated his circles. Each close encounter reminded Dillinger that no plan could account for every factor, and that vigilance alone could not guarantee survival. These encounters often became psychological games, with Dillinger reading the intentions of law enforcement, predicting their movements, and manipulating their expectations. His escapes were not just physical feats, they were demonstrations of mental acuity, a cat-and-mouse battle where foresight was often as valuable as firepower. One particularly tense episode occurred in Milwaukee, where Dillinger narrowly avoided capture in a crowded theater. Agents had tracked him there, surrounding the building in plain sight. Dillinger's ability to blend into the crowd, slipping through a side exit unnoticed, became another legendary exploit. But this escape highlighted a growing truth: each narrow evasion pushed the limits of luck and skill. The closer the law got, the fewer options remained. Even Dillinger, master strategist, could not entirely control the forces closing in from every direction. Despite these dangers, Dillinger seemed energized by the challenge. There was a thrill in knowing that he was constantly outsmarting formidable opponents, a rush that both exhilarated and consumed him. Every operation became more sophisticated, relying on timing, subterfuge, and adaptability. The blend of risk and strategy transformed him from a mere criminal into a figure of legend. And yet, this brilliance came with a heavy psychological cost. Constant tension, paranoia, and the looming threat of death were relentless companions, shaping his mind and actions in ways that were both extraordinary and terrifying. The public's perception of Dillinger added another layer of complexity. He was admired for courage, cleverness, and charm, yet feared for ruthlessness and audacity. This duality made him unpredictable to both law enforcement and potential allies. It also reinforced the legend, ensuring that every act, whether mundane or extraordinary, was scrutinized, retold, and mythologized. Dillinger's life had become a story constantly in motion, a narrative written by his daring, the media, and the relentless pursuit of justice. He had become more than a man, he was a symbol, a shadow moving between fame and fear. As Dillinger's legend grew, so did the tension among his associates. Loyalty became fragile, and whispers of betrayal began to ripple through the gang. Some feared capture, others coveted the spoils for themselves. Dillinger sensed the subtle shifts in demeanor, the fleeting glances that betrayed doubt. Over the years, he had learned to read human behavior like an open book. A misstep now could cost more than money, it could cost life. Trust was a rare and precious commodity, and Dillinger guarded it fiercely. Every ally was both an asset and a potential threat, requiring careful navigation and constant vigilance. The law was relentless. The FBI, now fully mobilized under J. Edgar Hoover, had perfected coordination between state and federal authorities. Dillinger's movements were tracked through informants, surveillance, and reports from nervous civilians. Yet, even under such pressure, he remained elusive. His ability to vanish in plain sight became almost mythical. Cities he entered were left in a state of awe and fear, streets he crossed seemed to bend around him. This mix of public fascination and dread only fueled his legend, but every escape underscored the fact that one mistake could end the story forever. One evening, a plan that had seemed flawless nearly ended in disaster. Dillinger had orchestrated a bank robbery in Cleveland, with every detail mapped, every escape route rehearsed. Yet, a nervous accomplice panicked, revealing the plan to a bystander who contacted the police. In minutes, officers surrounded the area. Dillinger had mere seconds to improvise. Using smoke, sudden movements, and decoy cars, he managed a narrow escape. The incident reminded him that no amount of planning could control the unpredictable nature of humans and chance. Even the most meticulous strategy could unravel in a heartbeat. These close calls began to take their toll psychologically. Dillinger slept little, his mind constantly replaying every escape, every conversation, every look that might betray intent. The weight of constant vigilance was exhausting. He became increasingly secretive, meeting fewer people and sharing even less information with his gang. He relied on coded messages, prearranged signals, and safe houses scattered across multiple states. Each decision was measured, calculated, and deliberate. Yet beneath the composure, tension coiled like a spring, ready to snap at any misstep or unforeseen encounter. Public fascination with Dillinger only intensified these pressures. Newspapers glorified his audacity, often portraying him as a charming, clever outlaw. Some hailed him as a hero against corrupt banks, others warned of a ruthless criminal on the loose. Dillinger understood the power of perception. Fame was armor and weapon alike. It protected him by diverting attention from his movements but also painted a bullseye on his back. Every story, every photograph, every public mention narrowed the margin for error, making each escape more dangerous, yet more intoxicating, feeding the audacity that defined his life. Within his gang, fear of betrayal became pervasive. Some members contemplated turning informant, drawn by bounties and pressure from law enforcement. Dillinger's brilliance was not limited to executing heists, he also managed human behavior. He balanced intimidation with charisma, fear with loyalty,
keeping his crew aligned while remaining emotionally isolated.
Trust was conditional, and alliances were temporary.
Every interaction required strategy.
He moved like a master chess player, always calculating moves 2 steps ahead. But no matter how cunning, the unpredictability of human nature remained a constant threat. The law responded with unprecedented persistence. Surveillance, informants, and coordination between states became increasingly sophisticated. Dillinger was constantly aware of the narrowing net.
Cities that once offered anonymity now felt like traps.
Each bank he targeted, each getaway he executed, was a demonstration of intellect and adaptability, but also a reminder that the margin for error had shrunk. Every successful operation intensified the hunt, ensuring that the next move would carry even greater consequences. The thrill of the chase had become a dangerous obsession, both for Dillinger and those pursuing him.
Dillinger adapted, innovating escape techniques and planning for contingencies.
He used multiple vehicles, alternative routes, and timed distractions to confuse pursuers. Yet, even these elaborate strategies could not guarantee survival. Each heist carried an invisible weight, the knowledge that law enforcement was growing smarter, faster, and more relentless. The more daring the escape, the higher the stakes. Success only postponed the inevitable confrontation, and Dillinger knew that one slip could lead to capture or death. The tension between audacity and mortality defined his existence.
The public's fascination transformed Dillinger into something larger than life.
He was admired, feared, and mythologized simultaneously. His charm, cunning, and boldness created a persona that transcended ordinary criminality. Yet this fame was perilous. It forced him into a constant performance, each appearance, each movement scrutinized by eyes both friendly and hostile. He became a man both celebrated and hunted, whose life existed in a delicate balance between legend and mortality. Every decision had consequences, and every act of brilliance carried the shadow of danger. By now, Dillinger had reached the peak of his notoriety. His name was known from coast to coast, whispered in fear and fascination in every city he passed through. Banks shuddered early in anticipation of his audacious strikes, and ordinary citizens followed the newspapers with bated breath, eager to hear the latest exploit. He was no longer simply a criminal, he had become a living symbol of audacity, rebellion, and skill. Yet this fame came at a cost. The more celebrated he became, the more the law intensified its pursuit, making every move increasingly perilous and every decision fraught with tension. Every heist during this period was executed with cinematic precision. Dillinger studied every bank, memorized every layout, and calculated every timing with meticulous care. Vehicles were swapped multiple times during the escape, decoy routes deployed to confuse authorities, and accomplices stationed strategically to mislead any pursuers. His operations were no longer improvisations, they were performances, a blend of strategy, psychology, and audacity. Yet, despite the brilliance of these plans, a single overlooked detail, a hesitant accomplice, or an unexpected civilian could destroy months of preparation in seconds, reminding him that skill alone could not guarantee survival. The FBI's pursuit had become obsessive. J. Edgar Hoover had assigned the nation's best agents to track Dillinger, coordinating intelligence across multiple states with relentless precision. Every tip, rumor, and eyewitness report was analyzed, every photograph circulated to officers nationwide.
Dillinger was now a ghost hunted by an entire agency, yet he thrived in this environment of pressure and danger.
Each escape reinforced his skill, but also sharpened the awareness that one fatal misstep could end the legend permanently.
Dillinger's network of accomplices became increasingly fragile under the pressure. Fear, greed, and suspicion seeped into every corner. He knew that one betrayal could undo years of careful planning.
To survive, he relied on a combination of intimidation, charm, and careful observation, managing each person as both a tool and a potential threat. Trust was a currency he spent sparingly, and alliances were measured in hours and days, not years. Even his closest confidants were never fully trusted. Each interaction required constant vigilance and careful calculation, for one mistake could be fatal. Public perception worked in tandem with the law, amplifying the stakes. Newspapers portrayed Dillinger as both a folk hero and a menace, romanticizing his audacity while warning of his danger. This duality fascinated him. Fame was both protection and threat. It allowed him to operate under a veneer of charm while drawing attention to every action. He had become an enigma, simultaneously admired and hunted. The scrutiny of the public and press intensified the game, making every decision critical, every appearance a gamble that could tip the balance between survival and disaster. By this point, every heist required multiple contingencies. Dillinger had mastered the art of improvisation, planning alternative escape routes, staging decoys, and timing operations down to the second. Even the smallest detail, the direction a pedestrian moved or the timing of a patrol car, could alter the outcome. He operated with the precision of a tactician and the instincts of a predator. Yet, the constant pressure began to take its toll. The thrill of the chase was inseparable from exhaustion and paranoia. Survival demanded brilliance, but it also required relentless mental and physical endurance. Despite the mounting danger, Dillinger's audacity remained unmatched. He pushed boundaries further than ever before, testing security systems, exploiting human error, and daring the law to catch him. Each successful operation elevated his legend, feeding both public fascination and his own ego. Yet he knew that each triumph also tightened the noose. The FBI was relentless, public attention unyielding, and his network increasingly unreliable. Each heist carried the invisible weight of inevitable confrontation, a reminder that no matter how clever, no one escapes forever. The psychological strain was immense. Dillinger rarely slept, constantly calculating movements and analyzing threats. Shadows became familiar enemies, and silence carried the weight of danger. He was both master of his environment and prisoner of circumstance, constantly balancing risk, skill, and instinct. The life of infamy that fueled his legend also isolated him emotionally, forcing him to act with precision and mistrust even among allies. The thrill of audacity was inseparable from the constant awareness that death could strike at any moment, turning legend into tragedy in seconds. Even as he moved from city to city, every escape added to the mythology. Stories of his daring exploits spread faster than law enforcement could respond. Dillinger had become untouchable in the public imagination, a figure who challenged authority and outwitted entire agencies. Yet the more spectacular his escapes, the more concentrated the efforts to catch him. Fame became a double-edged sword. It elevated him above ordinary criminals but drew ever closer scrutiny, increasing the risk of exposure. Every move was a calculated gamble, each decision a life-or-death test against an encroaching and determined adversary.
By the end of this period, Dillinger was living on the razor's edge. His legend was unmatched, his exploits daring, and his skill undeniable.
Yet the world around him had transformed into a trap. Law enforcement had adapted, his allies had grown fearful or unreliable, and luck alone could no longer sustain him. Every heist, every escape, and every public appearance carried the weight of mortality. The shadows behind the legend lengthened, and the inevitable confrontation loomed larger than ever.
Dillinger's life had become a delicate balance between audacity and survival, between myth and the harsh realities closing in. Dillinger's life had become a constant game of cat and mouse. Each city he entered, each bank he struck, was layered with danger, and every step was measured with precision. Even the most minor oversight could spell disaster. The FBI had grown relentless, tracking his movements across state lines, coordinating informants, and analyzing every pattern. Dillinger knew that each heist drew him closer to an inevitable confrontation. Yet, he thrived on the tension, using it as fuel for his audacious schemes. Life had become a high-stakes performance, where instinct, timing, and nerve were the only guarantees of survival. Within his gang, fear was palpable. Trust was fragile, and paranoia simmered beneath the surface. Dillinger had learned to manage his associates like chess pieces, balancing intimidation and loyalty with subtle psychological control. He understood that betrayal was always lurking, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. Even the slightest hesitation from a teammate could jeopardize an entire operation. Yet, his meticulous planning and innate charisma often kept the team aligned, at least temporarily. The delicate balance of authority and fear allowed him to execute bold heists while managing the constant risk of internal collapse. One particularly dangerous encounter occurred in Chicago, where Dillinger narrowly avoided capture after a tip-off from an unknown informant. Surrounded by law enforcement, he relied on split-second decision-making, decoy vehicles, and improvised maneuvers to escape. The tension in those moments was suffocating. Bullets tore through the night, alarms rang, and civilians scattered in panic. Yet, like always, Dillinger emerged unscathed, leaving authorities and bystanders stunned. The escape reinforced his reputation, but it also highlighted the relentless pressure closing in from all sides, reminding him that one miscalculation could be fatal. Public fascination intensified with each exploit. Newspapers glorified his cunning and audacity, framing him as a charming outlaw challenging an oppressive system. The legend grew faster than law enforcement's reach. For Dillinger, fame was both a tool and a liability. It distracted authorities but also drew unwanted attention, narrowing safe havens and making each move more perilous. His duality fascinated the public, a criminal feared by the law yet admired for cleverness and daring. He had become more than a man, he was a symbol, a living story in motion, inspiring both admiration and dread across the nation. The psychological strain of constant pursuit became increasingly evident. Dillinger slept little, constantly analyzing threats, movements, and human behavior. Shadows and silence carried dangers he could not ignore. Each city, each street, each alleyway became a potential trap. Yet, this heightened awareness sharpened his instincts and made him even more elusive. He had turned vigilance into an art form, using fear, speed, and strategy to survive. The thrill of the chase was inseparable from exhaustion and anxiety, a relentless tension that both defined and consumed him. Even the most trusted associates were scrutinized. Dillinger recognized that human unpredictability could undo the most sophisticated plans. He monitored behaviors, words, and glances, analyzing loyalty and potential betrayal. Every decision had to account for multiple outcomes: success, failure, or treachery from within. This hyper-awareness created isolation but also ensured precision in every operation. Dillinger had become a master strategist, balancing psychology, timing, and audacity in a world where one misstep could be catastrophic. The closer he approached his final confrontations, the sharper his instincts became, though at increasing emotional cost. The law intensified its efforts, using informants, surveillance, and cross-state coordination to predict his moves. Dillinger understood the changing dynamics and adapted accordingly. Each escape required creativity and improvisation, blending boldness with precision. He manipulated both civilians and law enforcement, turning crowds, vehicles, and street layouts into tools for evasion. Yet with each narrowly avoided capture, the pressure mounted. The net was tightening, and every successful heist brought him closer to the inevitable. Dillinger's skill was extraordinary, but even the most meticulous genius could not fully control fate. Betrayal, fear, and stress weighed heavily on the gang. Each heist required flawless coordination, yet nerves frayed under the growing intensity. Some associates considered turning informant for bounty or leniency, while others acted out of sheer fear. Dillinger navigated these dangers with subtle intimidation and manipulation, keeping the team operational but always at arm's length. Trust was conditional, alliances temporary. Even a loyal companion could become a liability under pressure. In this world, human error was as deadly as bullets, and managing people became as critical as mastering tactics. Despite the danger, Dillinger's legend flourished. The public followed his every move with fascination, treating his exploits as a combination of theater and rebellion. He became a symbol of audacity, cunning, and defiance. Yet fame heightened risk. Each appearance, each action, each heist became a target for law enforcement. Dillinger understood that his mythos was both shield and sword, a tool to manipulate the world while simultaneously increasing the perils surrounding him. The delicate balance of legend and survival defined every moment of his existence. By the end of this chapter, Dillinger's life teetered between audacity and inevitability. The law was relentless, human behavior unpredictable, and luck increasingly tenuous. Every heist, every escape, and every decision carried the weight of mortality. His legend was untouchable, yet the shadows closing in were longer than ever. The tension of fame, pursuit, and internal betrayal created a perfect storm, setting the stage for the final confrontations that would define his life, legacy, and ultimate fate. Dillinger's story was approaching its climax, a delicate balance between brilliance and doom. By this point, the walls were closing in around Dillinger. Every city he entered,
Every bank he targeted was more dangerous than the last. Law enforcement had grown methodical, relentless, and increasingly bold. The FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover, coordinated across states, utilizing informants, photographs, and careful surveillance to anticipate his next move. Dillinger, once untouchable, now felt the tightening grip of inevitable confrontation. Each operation carried a new weight, a constant reminder that even the most brilliant plans could unravel in a single, fateful moment. Dillinger's intuition, honed over years of heists and escapes, became his most valuable weapon. He studied streets, watched law enforcement, and read civilian behavior like a map of potential threats. Every shadow was a danger, every noise a possible warning. His life had become a series of calculations, balancing audacity with extreme caution. Yet even his heightened instincts could not eliminate risk entirely. One misstep, an informant, a distracted ally, or a single unlucky encounter could transform daring success into disaster, and he knew this more clearly than ever. Inside his gang, tension reached new heights. Fear and suspicion corroded alliances, and Dillinger could sense every twitch of anxiety, every hesitation that hinted at betrayal. He relied on a mixture of charisma, intimidation, and manipulation to maintain control, but the margin for error had shrunk. One wrong glance, one miscommunicated signal, could cost them everything. The careful psychological equilibrium he maintained was strained by the relentless pressure of the hunt. In a world where human unpredictability was as dangerous as bullets, every interaction demanded constant vigilance and calculation. The public's obsession with Dillinger amplified the danger. Newspapers celebrated his cunning and audacity, while simultaneously fueling law enforcement's determination. Fame had become a double-edged sword. It distracted authorities but also painted him as the ultimate target. Each daring move, each clever escape, only tightened the scrutiny. Citizens and bystanders watched with fascination, unwittingly contributing to the legend while increasing the likelihood of exposure. Dillinger's mythos was a shield, but it also highlighted the narrowing avenues of freedom, leaving fewer safe options as the law closed in relentlessly. One particularly tense episode occurred in St. Paul. Dillinger had meticulously planned a bank robbery with multiple escape routes and decoys, but an unexpected informant compromised the operation. Police converged, blocking his path. Dillinger's reaction was instantaneous. He switched vehicles, altered routes mid-escape, and used crowded streets to mask his movements. By sheer skill and timing, he evaded capture. The episode reinforced his reputation but underscored the growing inevitability of confrontation. Each success now carried the weight of a ticking clock, a reminder that fate was steadily closing in. Psychologically, the pressure was immense. Dillinger's mind never rested. Every street, every car, every pedestrian was analyzed for risk. Sleep was fragmented, and paranoia sharpened into instinct. This constant vigilance was both survival and torment. The thrill of audacity coexisted with the fear of annihilation. Even ordinary tasks became exercises in strategy and anticipation. Each decision carried amplified consequences, and each moment outside his carefully constructed plans could be deadly. He had become a man defined by tension, living on the knife edge of skill, chance, and fate.
Dillinger's strategies became increasingly sophisticated under pressure. He employed multiple safe houses, relied on coded communications, and staged decoy vehicles to mislead authorities. Yet no amount of planning could account for the unpredictable variables of human behavior. Allies might panic, informants might reveal secrets, and civilians might unwittingly obstruct his escape. Each successful heist was a combination of meticulous preparation and instinctive adaptation, a performance balancing audacity and precision. But the reality loomed: the more spectacular his escapes, the more concentrated and dangerous the pursuit became. The law's coordination was reaching a new level of sophistication. State police, federal agents, and informants worked in tandem, anticipating Dillinger's every move. The FBI used every tool at its disposal: observation posts, car patrols, and intelligence networks. Dillinger, aware of the tightening net, had to improvise constantly. The thrill of outwitting authorities had evolved into a desperate survival game. Each close encounter was a lesson, each escape a temporary victory. Yet he knew that time was against him. The margin for error had narrowed to the point where one mistake could be fatal, and fate was waiting. Even amidst this growing danger, Dillinger's audacity remained unmatched. He continued to execute heists with daring precision, often using psychological tactics to manipulate civilians and law enforcement alike. His reputation for clever improvisation was legendary, feeding both public fascination and the urgency of law enforcement. But every brilliant move heightened the stakes, bringing him closer to confrontation. The delicate balance between myth and mortality defined each moment. Each success was temporary, each escape a fleeting triumph against an inescapable reality that was tightening around him like a noose. By the end of this chapter, Dillinger was acutely aware that his freedom was ephemeral. The law had adapted, his allies had grown wary, and the net of pursuit had tightened to a near impenetrable snare. Every decision, every move, every heist carried unprecedented risk. His brilliance and audacity were no longer guarantees of survival, they were tools to delay the inevitable. The stage was set for the final confrontation. Dillinger's legend had reached its apex, but the shadows closing in promised that the end of his story, and the culmination of years of daring, was now unmistakably near. By this stage, Dillinger was acutely aware that his luck was thinning. Each escape, no matter how brilliant, carried the shadow of inevitability. Law enforcement, coordinated across states, was relentless, and the net of pursuit was closing faster than ever. Every city he entered became a stage for careful observation, every street a potential trap. Dillinger's instincts, honed by years of narrow escapes, were the only thing keeping him ahead of the law. Yet even mastery and audacity could not erase the growing sense that the end was approaching, that every move now carried heightened risk. His inner circle had grown smaller, fragmented by fear, betrayal, and the constant pressure of pursuit. Trust was fragile, and paranoia shaped every interaction. Dillinger navigated these treacherous waters with a mix of charisma and intimidation, balancing psychological control with careful observation. Allies were managed like pieces on a chessboard, expendable if necessary, yet instrumental in executing complex plans. The isolation weighed heavily on him, but it sharpened his instincts, turning constant tension into both a weapon and a shield in the deadly game he played. Dillinger's heists became increasingly audacious, each one designed to maintain both financial gain and legendary status.
He executed these crimes with a blend of careful planning and improvisation, studying every bank layout, memorizing employee patterns, and exploiting every environmental variable. Vehicles were swapped multiple times, decoys deployed, and backup plans activated at a moment's notice. Yet, the more spectacular his escapades, the greater the intensity of the pursuit. Each success increased the risk of exposure and brought him closer to a confrontation that was becoming unavoidable.
Public fascination reached a fever pitch. Newspapers glorified his exploits, elevating Dillinger to the status of a folk hero to some and a dangerous criminal to others. Fame had become both an asset and a liability.
The attention distracted authorities but also painted him as a target, limiting the number of safe havens and increasing the scrutiny of his movements. Every daring escape fueled the mythology surrounding him, but simultaneously tightened the circle closing in. Dillinger existed as both a man and a symbol, a living story whose every act carried consequence. The FBI, under the direction of J. Edgar Hoover, intensified efforts to trap Dillinger, coordinating with local police and informants. Surveillance, stakeouts, and intelligence gathering became nearly constant. Every photograph, every reported sighting, every rumor was meticulously analyzed to predict his next move. Dillinger recognized the escalation. He could feel the narrowing margin for error. Each heist now required not only perfect execution but also a deep understanding of human behavior and law enforcement patterns. The game was no longer just about theft, it was a deadly dance of life and death. A tense episode in Dayton demonstrated how close the trap was closing. Dillinger had planned a bank robbery with precise timing and multiple contingencies, but an informant betrayed the plan. Law enforcement converged unexpectedly, creating chaos. In the ensuing scramble, Dillinger relied on split-second decision-making, decoy vehicles, and improvisation to escape. The event reinforced both his brilliance and the fragility of his situation. He knew that one day, the luck and skill that had sustained him might fail, and the pursuit would finally catch him. The psychological toll of constant evasion was immense. Dillinger rarely slept, analyzing every movement, every possibility, and every potential threat. Shadows and silence carried danger, while every conversation and gesture were scrutinized for signs of betrayal. The tension was relentless, yet it honed his instincts to a near superhuman level. He moved through cities like a ghost, blending into crowds, manipulating environments, and staying always one step ahead. But even his extraordinary skills could not remove the underlying reality. The net was tightening, and time was running out. Every heist, every escape, every improvised maneuver now carried amplified consequences. Allies were unreliable, informants were everywhere, and law enforcement was increasingly bold. Dillinger relied on a combination of strategy, observation, and instinct to navigate these dangers. Each operation became a performance where audacity, timing, and human psychology intersected. Yet the relentless pursuit made every success more precarious. Even the most brilliant escapes were temporary reprieves from an inevitable confrontation that loomed ever closer, a confrontation that would determine whether legend or mortality prevailed. Public perception continued to fuel the chase. Dillinger was admired for courage and cunning,
feared for ruthlessness, and mythologized as an untouchable figure. Every story, photograph, and retelling heightened the intensity of law enforcement's efforts. Fame had become a double-edged sword. It enhanced his aura but drew the net tighter. Each daring move now carried the risk of exposure and the threat of finality. The legend was alive, but mortality was imminent. Dillinger's life had become a delicate, high-stakes balance between genius, luck, and the inexorable force of the law. By the end of this chapter, the stage was set for the final confrontation. Dillinger's brilliance, audacity, and meticulous planning had allowed him to outwit authorities for years, but the noose was tightening inexorably. Allies had become unreliable, the public obsessed, and law enforcement coordinated and relentless. Every decision carried life-or-death consequences. Dillinger's story teetered between legend and mortality, audacity and consequence. The end was approaching, and history was poised to witness the culmination of one of America's most daring criminal careers. The shadows behind the legend were about to reveal the ultimate truth. The end came not in the chaos of a gunfight or a daring chase, but through careful planning and betrayal. Dillinger, the man who had eluded law enforcement across states, had grown confident in his routines, relying on charm, strategy, and a network of allies. Yet, even the most brilliant criminal cannot anticipate every human variable. One of his closest associates, weary of the constant danger and tempted by a reward, disclosed critical information to the FBI. This betrayal set in motion the final sequence of events that would bring the untouchable outlaw to his inevitable reckoning. On a seemingly ordinary day in Chicago, Dillinger left his safe house unaware that agents were already in place, watching, waiting, and prepared for every eventuality. The FBI had coordinated a meticulous plan, analyzing his habits, tracking his movements, and positioning themselves at key points. Dillinger, confident in his disguise and street smarts, moved as he always had, believing he could once again outsmart his pursuers. But the meticulous trap had been set with precision, leaving no room for improvisation. The hunter had become the hunted. The moment of confrontation was sudden and surreal. Dillinger exited the building, unaware of the agents surrounding the area. Law enforcement, poised with calculated patience, closed in with silence and precision. Civilians watched, bewildered, as the figure who had once seemed invincible now walked straight into the hands of destiny. Dillinger's instincts, which had guided him through years of near captures, were finally challenged by a combination of careful planning, betrayal, and coordination that even he could not evade. The tension was palpable, like the pause before a storm breaks. For Dillinger, realization came too late. The betrayal, the traps, and the relentless pursuit converged in a moment of fatal clarity. His audacity, charm, and skill, once thought unstoppable, were no match for the networked strategy of law enforcement. The man who had danced on the edge of danger for years was suddenly grounded, his freedom extinguished. In that instant, the legend and the man intersected, showing that even brilliance has limits, and even luck eventually runs out. The world watched as one of America's most notorious criminals faced the consequences of his audacity. Dillinger's capture was both dramatic and poignant. Law enforcement approached carefully, knowing the danger, yet confident in the meticulous planning that had cornered him. There was no violent confrontation, no desperate escape.
The years of evasion, the daring heists, and the narrow escapes culminated in a moment of quiet inevitability. Civilians, reporters, and agents alike sensed the gravity of the moment. A criminal who had become larger than life was finally brought down, and history was about to record the final chapter of his extraordinary life.
Even in captivity, Dillinger's charisma endured.
Reporters and onlookers watched with fascination, eager to capture the face of the man who had defied authority for so long. He maintained a calm exterior, the same charm and audacity that had once intimidated and delighted, now muted by the inevitability of consequence.
His legend, carefully constructed over years of daring feats, remained intact even in defeat.
The world was witnessing not just the fall of a criminal, but the closing of a chapter in American history that had captivated the nation with audacity, skill, and mystery. The psychological weight of capture was immense. Dillinger understood that years of brilliance and audacity had led him to this singular moment. The years of evasion, strategy, and improvisation had delayed the inevitable, but they could not prevent it. He reflected, perhaps fleetingly, on the narrow escapes, the clever maneuvers, and the allies both loyal and treacherous who had shaped his journey. Even in defeat, there was an acknowledgement of the genius required to survive as long as he had. Yet, reality was absolute, freedom was lost, and the game that had defined him was over. The public reaction was electric. Newspapers and radio spread the news, recounting Dillinger's daring career and his ultimate capture. Stories of his audacity, charm, and clever escapes captivated the nation. He had become a symbol, both feared and admired, a man who challenged authority and survived against impossible odds. Yet, the capture also served as a reminder that even the most brilliant criminal is vulnerable to betrayal, persistence, and the inexorable logic of law enforcement. The legend was complete, now frozen in history as both myth and cautionary tale. Dillinger's story ended not with violence or spectacle, but with the quiet inevitability of consequence. The years of audacious thefts, narrow escapes, and psychological mastery had brought him fame, fear, and fascination. Yet all brilliance has a limit, and all luck eventually fades. His capture marked the conclusion of a saga that had gripped the nation, blending danger, skill, and human unpredictability into a narrative that would endure for decades. The man was no longer free, but the legend he had built was immortal. As Dillinger was taken into custody, the nation reflected on a life of extraordinary audacity and skill. The outlaw who had eluded capture across states, outsmarted authorities, and become larger than life was now part of history. His daring, intelligence, and charisma had captivated millions, creating a legend that would endure long after his death. The story of John Dillinger, thief, tactician, and icon of audacity, had reached its dramatic conclusion. The man was captured, but the myth, born of brilliance, audacity, and relentless pursuit, would echo through generations as a testament to a life lived on the edge of danger and destiny.